Some exciting breaking news now. We have been speaking with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. It's an exclusive interview. Let's bring in the senior executive editor for Bloomberg Economics, Stephanie Flanders, who conducted the extensive interview. Stephanie, the Saudi Crown Prince is making headlines on a number of fronts, including the Aramco IPO and Saudi Arabia's relationship with US President Donald Trump. Tell us a little bit about how the Crown Prince is seeing the president these days.
Well, he loves him. He told us he loves Donald Trump and he loves working with him, which was would have been quite a little bit surprising in any time, but particularly when it came only a day after President Trump had said that the Saudi king, that's the prince's father, wouldn't last 2 weeks without support from the US, and they should cough up more money for defense. He didn't. The prince obviously didn't quite agree with that line. He thought he'd last a lot longer than 2 weeks, but he didn't seem like he said 100% it had not changed the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia, and that, as I said, that he loved him. I think it was sort of more in the rest of the interview. We had 80 minutes with him sitting in the palace, sort of late in an evening, which is when he often does these kind of meetings. And one of the other things that I think people in the markets will be interested in is he absolutely stood by the idea that Aramco would have its IPO just not quite as soon as people thought. So a lot of people had thought that was permanently on hold, that IPO. He insisted that wasn't the case. He still was 100% thought it was in the national interest, but there were particular reasons why it was going to be pushed off for maybe a couple more years because another deal was going through involving Aramco. Some people had thought that this other deal that Aramco was involved in, buying a chunk of the Sabic petroleum company, was partly about, or the chemicals company, was partly about avoiding that IPO, but he said absolutely not. He's going to do both, and it's going to raise lots of money for that sovereign wealth fund that he wants to build up.
Stephanie, obviously a lot of people are going to take notice to those comments about the Aramco plans. Just build on those comments you're making, the significance of wanting to forge ahead with those IPO plans.
Yeah, so you remember he said he had this very ambitious valuation number for the whole of Aramco of $2 trillion, which meant if you put 5% into public hands, that it would raise him $100 billion. Some people had raised question marks about that. We'd had some reporting along those lines earlier in the year saying people in the markets did not think it was valued anything like that high, and we thought maybe that was one of the reasons why it seemed to be on hold. But I think maybe one of the reasons that he gave us this interview was to put the record straight on that, or at least give his side of the story. He said, as I said, it's not on a permanent hold. He still wants to do it, but they are first going to do this rather complicated deal where Aramco raises money in the markets to buy another company, Sabic, and that will raise a lot of money for Sovereign Wealth Fund, similar kind of amount, maybe slightly less, 70 billion. And keep it going, if you like, keep it on the right track for a year or two before he's then able to do the IPO. But it was, we've written the full story. It's a sort of complicated arrangement, but basically he said we shouldn't think that these two things are alternatives. The Sabic deal will happen, the money will go to the Sovereign Wealth Fund from that, and then when there's been a full year of financial accounts for Aramco with this new business model, owning this upstream capacity from Sabic, then they'll have the IPO. Of course, we could be still talking about the IPO in a few years' time, but he insists it's going to happen.